Hello and welcome to another exciting review for the Magnus Protocol. It is 100 degrees outside that window right there, but even that heat cannot compare to the burning in my heart to talk about this episode. This was such a good episode, and we're going to get into it as soon as we get done with the intro. So, let's talk about Magnus Protocol episode 27, Riven. Our classification is CAT 3RB 5535-180-218-45-1005-2024. Kidnapping, carriage, consumption, letter. So, this is a really good episode. Man, I don't even know where I want to start here, honestly. I guess we should just start with the start. But Lena has everybody cleaning up for the MP that's coming. Trevor Herbert, we'll get there. And Gwen's a little frustrated. Sam is feeling good after spending the night or day with Celia. And that gets us into our case. And our case is from February 18th, 1845, on someone taking N's recommendation and about the great work. And what we find out here is that this person is probably Jonah Magnus. And so at first I was like, well, maybe it's Albertus Magnus, but the timeline doesn't quite line up. But that also might not mean anything either, because as we're going to get into, the timeline is very squirrely here in these. And again, when I say I don't really know where to start, it is because I just don't. Like, there are things that we need to talk about with this, with Magnus here, whether Jonah or Albertus, that we can't without talking about the other stuff. So I guess we'll try and take it chronologically, but we're going to get to some stuff. And again, for anybody who doesn't know, Albertus Magnus was a reputed alchemist of our world, which I'm cross-referencing everything I can with our world and finding a bunch of interesting things. This letter would have been written with the understanding that using specific phrases would mean something else. So like here, in instead of the name, and the person would understand it, and the great work being the name given to transmutation itself in the attempt to create a philosopher's stone, right, in alchemy. So with that said, who is this in? There's a couple people it could be. It could be Isaac Newton. I pulled up a whole list of both the Fellows of the Royal Society and of prominent alchemists, and there's really only like 3 names that came up that I immediately went, oh, that could be it. But whoever this in is, you would know if you were receiving this letter, right? It could be Isaac Newton, absolutely. He would probably be better well known as Newton, right? It could be Napier, either one of the 2 Napiers that were pretty big in the Royal Society. Or it could be Nicholas Flamel, well-known alchemist who may or may not have actually existed, and supposedly one of the people that actually was able to make the Philosopher's Stone. I'm leaning more towards Newton, but I don't think Flamel is a bad guess at all either, because of what we know with the timeline, as we're going to get into when we get to talk about Archibald Cameron's. I know this is going to be very, like, scattershot again. There's a lot confirmed here that we're going to get into that really has me excited. And I haven't given a spoiler warning in a long time, but I think that we might be on the cusp of cracking this whole thing open. So if you have not listened to the Magnus Archives first, you really should, because this, yeah. So, Magnus here, I'm going to call him Jonah Magnus, but I don't know that it's Jonah. I just know Augustus is the one reading it, and this is the founder of the Magnus Institute. This is the one they named it after. My assumption is this is Jonah because Albertus Magnus should have been dead by about 600 years. But I don't know that it's not Albertus, right? My original theory was that Albertus Magnus was the one that bound the fears like into the new versions they have become, fragmented them down using alchemy and transmuted them into like the seven or something. Not we're gonna have to get into that too. Astrology comes up here. Anyway, the 7 planets, right? I don't know that that's not a good clear dissection of what we've seen so far, but it could wind up being those are like the mega powers. Look, I'm rambling. There's so much here, okay? Focus in, Trey. Focus in. It's a lot. So Magnus asked the question here of, is coming together stalling their progress? Is the great work something that needed to be completed solo? Is by bringing other people into it, is it ruining the process of the great work? And ultimately he says, no, probably not, right? If it was, why would they have founded the Institute? Why would they all be working together? And that is our confirmation that the Institute is the alchemists working together. And as we see later on with other mentions of people that were fellows in the Royal Society, the Royal Society and the Magnus Institute are basically like intertwined at this point, from what it seems, which would lead us to believe that Boyle's attempts earlier to stop Newton may have worked, but it didn't turn them all back to good science, right? Like he intended. It definitely has continued down the path of alchemy. Again, sorry, I'm trying to focus in. I am a million ways here that I want to go. I studied this one today. I listened to it shortly after it came out, and I studied it basically all day, trying to make sure all my affirmations here and all my stuff was correct, all my references. So, Magnus finds a carriage, and this carriage is alive, and it is eating people. And the revelation of this carriage changes the plan. Because instead of, oh, we need to work on transmuting things, it's if these things are real already, we haven't created them, they're already here, then how do we harness that? How do we use that? And does it prove that all that we've been trying to do is not foolish? Which, to me, basically confirms that the fears were here and the Magnus Institute somehow found a way to do something to them. Whether they actually bound them and changed them, it's hard to say. But something happened, and that something was not instantaneous, right? It wasn't like, hey, they tried to do something to them and it destroyed them instantly, because the Institute was still operating when Sam was a kid. So something happened and could still be happening through the OIR, right? But instead, I have a different theory based on the name of the MP, which is that I think the Institute and the OIR were against each other. I think the OIR is an organization made for tracking and containing these entities, and the Institute was creating them or abetting them in some way, and that's why the Institute was burned down. It was an attempt to stop them, right? Because my assumption is the Institute found a way to transmute fear itself. Because what Magnus takes away from this carriage when it eats Archibald Cameron is that fear was the key. And so, if a bunch of alchemists figured out that they can use fear as like a currency almost, as a metal, as a mineral of itself, to be able to perform transmutation, what horrors could they create? We got to talk about Magnus feeding Archibald Cameron to this thing and who Archibald Cameron is. I did, like I said, a lot of digging. Archibald Cameron, there was not, as far as I can tell, in any census in all the world, a person named Archibald Cameron alive in our world in 1845. However, there are multiple rather famous Archibald Camerons that existed around that time. Dr. Archibald Cameron of Lochiel died in 1753 in our world, would be like 137, roughly. But that math might not be 100% right, but would be well over 100 years old if Archibald had lived that long to be able to be in 1845. But there's also, that was the Dr. Archibald Cameron. There's also the scholar and minister Archibald Cameron, born in 1866, and the General Archibald Cameron, born in 1870. Obviously, in our world, none of these people were alive in 1845. But that doesn't mean in the Magnus world they weren't. And with reference to Isaac Newton before, and with maybe Nicholas Flamel, their lives could be extended. He does mention that Archibald Cameron is young, that he is younger than the rest of them, but if this is not Jonah Magnus, and this is Albertus Magnus, a 100-year-old man would not be old comparatively, because Albertus Magnus was alive in the 1200s. So it could be that this is the Dr. Archibald Cameron, who was a physicist. I'm sorry, not a physicist, a physician. I don't know how I messed that up. I am so sorry. But it also could be just a different Archibald Cameron, or the timelines could be different in this world, and thus people were born at different times. You know, it could be a lot of different things. There's also a reference here to the scrutiny of Boyle's meddling inheritors, which makes me think that is not direct as in Boyle's children as much as it is the children of chemistry and not alchemy, right? We're going to mention astrology later, but much in the same way that chemistry was the good science to alchemy's bad science, astrology is like the bad science of the stars, where astronomy is the good science, right? Astrology like takes a diversion from Hermeticism in the same way that alchemy tried to separate itself from Hermeticism and failed, and the part that did separate off became chemistry, the part that did separate off became astrology, you know. And again, I'm not an astrology guy. Might not be surprised to hear that, since I've talked about all these famous chemists that I'm a big fan of. But at the same time, astrology's ties to Hermeticism and alchemy's ties to Hermeticism lead to some very interesting conclusions there. And if you're somebody that is more into the astrology side of things, please let me know your thoughts on what we're talking about in the comment section down below, because I have the bare minimum understanding of astrology needed that I have gained from studying astronomy and alchemy, and that's as much as I've got. But I say all that to say that it sounds like it is Boyle's children, Boyle's inheritance, as it were, chemistry, that is putting pressure on Magnus with alchemy. And could that mean that these that follow Boyle's example, who, remember, tried to burn down and succeeded in burning down Isaac Newton's lab in this universe, is that the OIR? Because as we come to find out, the new minister that's coming to see the OIR is Trevor Herbert, the vampire slayer in Magnus Archives. There's so much more still to talk about. I feel like we've talked about some of the biggest things, but there's still so much more. Just the idea, real quick, of Archibald Cameron taking these notes as he is digested inside the stomach of this thing is horrifying. And if this was bound to one of the fears, it could very easily be the hunt, and this is how it hunts people, right? And eats them. Or it could be the flesh. It could be the dark, the fear of what goes bump in the night. It could be the stranger. It looks just like a normal carriage, but it's not. It's actually this other entity that is pretending to be. I love that. Again, we have so many options. We didn't learn enough about it itself, but just the mention of like supernaturally it eats them, and that's how Magnus figured out that because he could find a coat before, the pad would be fine, the notepad. Just again, Magnus, no cost too great for finding out information and furthering the great work, right? From there, as if all that wasn't already good enough, right? We have Gwen and Alice talking. Gwen getting a weird email asking Alice, and Alice being like, well, yeah, I'm trans on the internet. Of course I get weird emails. Like, oh, well, yeah, that makes sense, you know. I wish it wasn't that way, but yeah, of course. Celia referencing, I moved on from that too quick. My brain is going 1,000 miles a minute. We'll come back to it. Celia having the paperwork that Helen sent over about the properties and finding Hilltop Road, the Hilltop Center, the Outreach Center. Real quick. Is Gwen getting the same kind of emails from John? From a John that Sam was getting? Is this Outreach Center where the Magnus Institute performed the great work and from this side of the rift anyway, pulled the fears through, focused them down, harnessed them in some way? They call it an outreach center. That can't be an accident. It was originally going to be a retail unit, and then it was in 1997. We've got the MP as Trevor Herbert. Celia gets really serious when they talk about the archivist. What is this? What is the important part of 1997? Sam and Celia are going to keep going out. Congratulations. So glad for you two. What is the purpose of 1997? I tried to cross-reference it with my notes from Magnus Archives, and I couldn't find anything in there about 1997 that was important. I am overwhelmed by this episode. I feel like this episode has like proven without a shadow of a doubt that either Albertus Magnus or Jonah Magnus found a way, whether successfully or not, found a way to harness the fears. And if it succeeded, that is why things are different now. And if it didn't, that is why things are different now, right? Where things have spiraled out of control. That was a bad choice of phrase there. No, it is fantastic. I find every time we get an Augustus episode, they're my favorite episodes because they're always like tying in history or chemistry or any of those with alchemy and with protocol, right? And one thing I definitely don't want to move on from here are the two things that Celia mentions from the paperwork that were really interesting. Questions that the archives, or the Institute, would ask of properties they wanted to buy. Like, can you send us a picture of what the constellations look like from the front elevation of the house facing due east? Which ties in astrology, which, you know, it was always going to be tied in. The 7 planets that are important, they're not called planets in astrology, but they are in alchemy, which tie into, I think I still have that tab up where I was checking into that. Yeah, the sun, the moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. Like I said, I wanted to make sure I had all my ducks in a row here before I talked about it. I don't ever want to spread misinformation, and I'm so sorry if I got any of this wrong. It is always my intention to make sure that I am telling you the facts of the matter, or at least what people believed to be the facts. Again, I don't think astrology calls them planets, but each one of those has their own tie-in, and I don't believe it's an accident that they were watching the stars, right? Then you have the other part about, I'm going to try, we can do it. perchloroethylene, which is also known as, I had this ready, tetrachloroethylene, which was made by Victor Renault, which, Henri Victor Renault, but he did not go by Henri, which was also a fellow of the Society, of the Royal Society. A lot of people think it was made by Michael Faraday. It's not. Michael Faraday made carbon tetrachloride. Michael Faraday, also a member of the Royal Society. Look, all I'm saying is they wanted perchloroethylene for a reason, right? And perchloroethylene, specifically tetrachloroethylene, is like a really good, colorless, heavy liquid. It's sometimes called like dry cleaning fluid because of how well it's used. It also is a pretty good brake cleaner, but specifically, it has a mild, sweet, sharp odor. It is like the perfect, if you look at it from all of the records of what Alchemist Labs smelled like, it is like the perfect alchemy liquid, right? Non-flammable, it's stable, it's colorless, it's heavy. I feel like there's more there that I'm not getting, but they had a purpose for all that they were doing. Of course they did, right? And I feel like we're right on the cusp of understanding it. I really do. I love this mimic carriage that just eats people. That's so wonderful. Such a cool idea, right? But even more, I love that I think we've almost cracked the code. And my theory is that the great work failed. And that's why everything is running amok now as it is. And how is that going to be resolved? I have no idea. But we know dimension hopping has been happening. We know that creatures already existed in this world, which would mean the fears maybe had already come through, or they were pulled through. I'm thinking maybe they were already here, and then Hilltop Road was the Alchemist, the Institute's attempt to go to other dimensions and find other things. What all has been messed with because of that, there's no way to say right now, but I am stoked. I hope you are too. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. One last thing I wanted to mention too is I'm so glad that people enjoy the captions. I did leave a couple funny jokes in there, or little funny references, but they are a little bit of extra work, so I don't normally ask this, but if you like the captions, please, like the video. I would appreciate it. All that said, let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. I have a pretty good working theory right now. How true it winds up being, I have no idea, but I think the alchemists found the fears were already in this world, and they found some way to bind them, and it's going to be tied into astrology, and it's going to be tied into Hermeticism. The nature of fear in Hermeticism is very interesting, in the idea of it's something we need to purge of ourselves, but also it's something we can use, and it's perfect for alchemy, that fear is the vessel by which things are made, right? Whether that actually winds up being how they do it or not, I don't know, but it would make a lot of sense to me. So let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below, and until next time, I've been Trey. This has been The Full Spectrum. Remember to always enjoy the full spectrum. Magnus.